Hi guys, this is Amanda Costa, and thanks again to Dee for that lovely introduction. As Dee mentioned, Tanya and I will be here today to talk to you about growing youth involvement in your organization. Just a quick acknowledgement that none of this would be possible, and this lovely webinar would not be here without our wonderful funders, Neidler and SAMHSA, and their support. And to just give you a quick overview, so we recognize that growing youth involvement in your organization is a huge topic with so many different avenues. What we'll be focusing on today is going over 4 mechanisms of youth voice and meaningful ways to involve young adults. And Tanya will be walking you guys through that a little bit. And then I'll take over to talk about some specific effective approaches for engaging young adults that have worked here at the RCC and we've learned about over the last 6 years in the work that we do. And then we really want to open it up at the end to hear from you guys and questions you have and also what you've been doing to involve young adults in your work. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tanya to do a little disclaimer and then get us started.
Hi, everyone. So just so you know, most of the content from this webinar is just stuff that comes out of our experience, what we've learned. There is really also no one-size-fits-all for youth engagement in different organizations. So don't be discouraged if you try to use one of these things. Also, youth are very different, so there's also no one-size-fits-all per individual. Youth engagement is also very continuous, so just with all this, no one size fits all. Just expect a lot of trial and error in what you're using from this webinar, and of course feel free to ask questions at the end about anything else we don't talk about. And just so you know, there are some quotes in this webinar that are from youth, and they will be in purple throughout the webinar. So I will be talking about meaningful youth involvement. So first, I'll be talking about treatment planning and decision making. Then I'll be talking about peer worker roles. And then a popular one in the questions was participatory action research and evaluation. And of course, systems and service change. So first, why have young adults in general lead their own treatment planning? Well, young adults are definitely a lot more engaged and committed to services and supports that they have an active role in. Overall, people are way more engaged with things that they can change and make their own. If not, in general, there will be some frustrations. That's why there is a quote called, "Nothing about us without us." Don't do anything without my voice and my input in there. You know, youth are in a turbulent part of their life where they're constantly changing, their culture is changing, and so they want to be able to see things change with them. And so in this part of their life, there are many things solidifying. For example, self-determination skills, self-advocacy skills, and self-efficacy skills where they are confident in what they do. So if you really want to help young adults and you're in it to help them, it's very important for you to see them engage in their own treatment so that they can build their self-determination and decision-making and planning skills. So it's definitely a big benefit to young adults. So treatment planning, one size does not fit all. Again, mental health treatment is very tailored to older adults or children or sometimes just another generation. You know, as you see research grow and be implemented, it's already been maybe 7 to 10 years by the time articles come out and by the time there are treatments being implemented out in the field. So things are just constantly changing with the times, and also there are service gaps for young adults where you have young adults leaving the children's system by the time they're 18 and then the adult system is not necessarily ready to deal with someone who is still in their teens and still in just this middle ground stage of their life. So it's a big service gap, and so it needs to be customizable as long as the whole service has not been changed yet. So involving young adults in their own treatment, it ensures that the treatment plan is relevant, culturally appropriate, flexible towards that individual, that age group in general, that generation, and just the current practices of that culture. Also, it's just a way to just be respectful and value them by listening to what they want. And so we won't have time to cover absolutely all the different treatments, but there are a lot of good treatments out there, different approaches on how to involve young adults. There's Achieve My Plan, Open Dialogue, the TIP model, the Project Renew. These are all very good models of partnership with young adults. And then there are one-on-one models like motivational interviewing, shared decision-making, and person-centered planning. You will be able to access this slide, if you want to have these links later on the website. We'll have the slides, and we'll also have the video come up very soon. So peer worker roles, involving young adults there, we all know, or we all to some extent have learned, hopefully, what a peer specialist or a peer worker is, or a peer mentor. Those are our existing positions right now. In general, that's a position where people with lived experience are providing services and support directly to their peers. And so peers are people with mental health conditions, or just depending on the field, they may call peer mentors something else. They are usually same age or near age, and they have shared experience. You can have peer support workers in group settings or on one-on-one support. They can mentor on various life skills, and they can be utilized in a variety of settings. We have an example research study here. I don't know if many have heard about the Threshold study, but that's a program in Chicago, Threshold, and they did a feasibility study adapting the IPS model, or individualized placement and support. So they kind of combined supported employment and supported education with the use of near-age vocational peer mentors. Near-age peer mentors, they had near-age peer mentors with serious mental health conditions, with service experience in the service system, and they were at least high school graduates with school and or work history. So what they did was that the vocational peer mentors received 40 hours of training. They had an increased knowledge of the IPS model. They learned how to share their own story and how to use active listening skills. Their role was to work closely with education and employment specialists to provide emotional support and validation to young adults and exploring their work and school goals. And they were to model professionalism for those young adults. And so, in general, the results were that the young adults receiving the service they were getting advice. They felt that they can relate to their peer mentor, that they were being heard and understood, and can talk to someone that they can trust and feel safe with. The value characteristics, they valued someone who was very strong, positive, honest, trustworthy, and with similar life experiences and the ability to empathize. One of the young adults, and by the way, it's a pseudonym, so there's no real Sam. One of the young adults says that a peer mentor for the program was someone who was one of us. They can talk about their life and how they get through it and show us how to do it. So that's very important. So we're moving on to participatory action research. So there were a lot of questions about this, and I'm sure a lot of you are very interested in how the Transitions RTC here has done participatory action research. But first, we can define what that means. So participatory action research in general is a way for people to do research where they involve their population of interest in the process of actually designing and implementing research. So they're not just the subjects. So for example, if you're studying diabetes, you would have people with diabetes answer questions, give feedback, design the study, and see the data and evaluate that data all the way through to maybe disseminating the results. So here at the RTC, we of course have young adult research staff with serious mental health conditions involved in all phases of research. So all the way from the design to disseminating the results. So we have different types of studies here. Just this is our continuum of involvement here, where young adults are very equally separated into these levels in different studies. So we have the smallest level is youth-informed, and it goes all the way up to youth-led. We have several studies that are youth-led. So, for example, we started with a college study that was about accommodations, and then it turned into another study that is still youth-led about having young adults supporting one another on campus and just showing each other resources on being in order to be academically successful. Then there's youth partnered. Youth partnered is another level where
So Youth Partnered is another level of young adult involvement where we really try to understand how to meaningfully involve young adults with lived experience in the work. So when young adults are partnering with researchers here, we identify it as partnered because the decision-making and power dynamics are shifted, so young adults get to make some of the choices and decisions. They don't have full power to make the decisions like a youth-led study where a young adult is essentially the PI, but in a youth-partnered study, they can collaboratively make those changes with a researcher and say, here's my advice, and that holds a lot of weight. So that shift in power dynamics starts at Youth Partnered and really flourishes at Youth Led.
Okay, so Youth Involved is a level where youth are giving feedback in a study and or doing work where they are either coding or really looking at the data and just evaluating what that data is like, analyzing it, and probably doing some writing as well. So maybe they weren't involved in designing the study, or maybe they didn't have a lot of say of where the study went, but they are very involved in that part of just disseminating the results or analyzing the data. Youth Informed is more giving just more giving feedback, or maybe doing some auxiliary sort of activities. So maybe writing references on a study, or just in general going out to a youth council and asking the youth council what they would like to see in the study, or what they would analyze when they see a specific result in the study. So we talked a little bit about the college study. That's an example of the youth-led study where we talked about academic accommodations. And so we really did from design to publication on that one, like we were saying. So that's just an example of a youth-led study. So something that I want to talk about is the trial and error part. When you're involving young adults, it's always a trial and error. You have different individuals. You are in a research center, in a different states, different laws, different things going on. And so it wasn't always as it could be right now. In the first 3 years, we were in five per diem young adult positions. These positions had a generalized job description, so it wasn't really strength-based. There were separate young adult meetings. So, for example, if you have a meeting about a research study and you're looking at data, you had one meeting with young adults and one meeting with the PIs, or principal investigators of studies. And so we thought, oh, wait, that's kind of it's kind of like a waste of time. Maybe we should have one meeting. And so we also had a supervisor as our main support. So, of course, when you're dealing with young adults with mental health conditions, support and management may not go hand in hand as smoothly as you would want. Also, we only had internal youth voice. So those 5 young adults that we had at the center were very much the feedback that we got for studies or any publications that we had. So we really changed some things, especially towards our new grant, because we had our first 5-year grant, and then we decided to start changing some things towards our new grant. Right now we have 7 PAR staff on career trajectories, so it's not just per diem positions anymore, and they have a career ladder to look forward to. They had strength-based job descriptions, so the PAR staff are not just we used to call them project assistants, but now it's not just project assistants. They can be anywhere from a research technician to a research project director, anywhere they want to go. Or anywhere they have shown ability to go, that's where they will go. Now we have those integrated meetings, so people are not separated into different meetings anymore. We have a career coach, so the main support is no longer just the supervisor, but if the young adults feel like they would like to increase in a specific skill, the supervisor doesn't necessarily have to know. The supervisor kind of gets the point that the young adult is benefiting and increasing in a specific skill, but they're not teaching the young adult on their professional development. And also we have National Youth Voice now in the form of a youth advisory board, which is 100% led, and it is very diverse. We have young adults from across the United States, and who have a variety of different experiences. And they're there for ongoing support on our studies, giving feedback, and even testing out surveys and different things like that. One of our YAB members said that being part of the YAB, I could see my comments put to good use. My thoughts and opinions felt important, and I was treated with respect. So they really see that whatever they have to say is being put to good use. And we are actually doing something with what they say. So, all right, so partnering with young adults to produce systems and service change. First of all, what is systems change? Systems change is a shift in the way that a community makes decisions about policies, programs, and the allocation of its resources, and ultimately in the way it delivers services to its citizens. So we're talking about mental health services systems change. So why change the mental health system at all? Well, definitely in order to accommodate for changes in times, cultures, generations, technology, educational, and work market developments and research. Sometimes we just get comfortable in what we have been working with for a while, and so we don't see that generations are changing, times are changing, the labor market is changing, everything is changing, and so we get really comfortable, and then we have a specific way of doing things, and we don't move, and then we ask why what we're doing is ineffective to specific people. So how is systems change achieved? It's really from the ground up. You can't do it with just some details because it will break apart. For example, we have a quote here from a young adult in Headstrong, Ireland. She said, in Headstrong, we have young people participating at all levels, including the board level. We get expenses paid and accommodations if we need it. Things like that enable everyone to participate. If there was not a provision for young adults to have accommodations through the budget of the original, let's say, of the original grant of this system, then that would have never happened for, let's say, Laura. So you definitely have to write it into grants, write it into a budget, write it into just the original plan for things, so that young adults can get everything that they need. In Massachusetts, it's been very successful. Since 2001, Massachusetts has had a transition age youth initiative where youth were involved in very profusely in different parts of the system. So we have the Youth Development Community, which was established in 2002, and they really ask youth about what their feedback is for transition age youth programming in the Department of Mental Health, and they're really considered key to the initiative. So anything that they say is taken very seriously, and that group is actually peer-led, and that's a monthly meeting, and it still happens to this day. And so there are just dozens of young adults working for the Department of Mental Health, and young adults, for the most part, seem to be very happy with the services that they're getting, or at least with the feedback that they're able to give and the fact that they're being heard by the Department of Mental Health here in Massachusetts. So that's just a very good example on systems change.
All right, thanks, Tanya. So Tanya talked a lot about 4 different mechanisms for involving youth voice in your organization and ways you can be thinking about how do you get young adult voice at the table, like hiring peer workers or partnering in your research. And so this next part of the webinar that I'll be reviewing is really the 101 big questions that we've been asked at the RTC about effective approaches for supporting young adult voice and choice in your organization. So the 4 topics that I'll be covering is the idea of paid versus unpaid young adult roles, how to prepare your team, and then how to prepare young adults for joining your team, thinking about accommodations and other avenues for support when you do bring young adults in to provide youth voice and expertise in your work, and then some challenges we've heard from employers and from our employer, the Transitions RTC, that they've struggled with employing young adults here and things to think about in that avenue. So the first one I'm going to start with is paid versus unpaid young adult roles. So one of the big questions people who are new to youth voice ask us a lot is, how do we pay young adults? Why should we pay young adults? What should that look like? And if we don't have funding to pay young adults, then what should that role look like if they really need to volunteer to get us started? We recognize that we're a little unique here at the RTC because our funding wrote in that youth voice was a big part of the work we do. So we did have a grant that really supported young adult voice in hiring young adults, but not everyone has that avenue. However, I'm really going to push for a big plug of, if you can, you should pay young adults who you're bringing on for your work. Payment for work is ideal wherever possible, but it also sends a message of appreciation for the time and expertise young adults have. When you have a young adult at the table, their expertise is unique, and their voice and their skills are unique, and we need to recognize the value of having that youth voice at the table. And payment is one really important way to do that. It also allows for ongoing learning opportunities and a shift in power dynamic at your organization. When you pay and employ young adults in a professional position, you're saying that their voice matters, and it also helps to provide them the opportunity to stay committed to you, because as a young adult myself, I have a lot of financial commitments I need to be thinking about, and as much as I want to do youth voice work, I also need to put food on my table and pay for my apartment and be thinking about that. So by paying me to be involved and share my expertise, it allows me to stay committed to an organization and really utilize my voice to the best of my ability. And it also creates a career ladder. So when we started here, as Tanya mentioned earlier, these were part-time per diem positions, and RTC has since transitioned all young adults into a professional career track where we have opportunities to grow as our skills grow. And that has been instrumental in developing a really strong young adult voice work ethic here, and young adults who are able to stay committed to the RTC for a lot of years. I've been here for 6 years, and a big piece of that is because I could grow as my youth voice and expertise grew, as my skills grew. So it really created that career development for people to grow with the organization. And from the voice of a young adult themselves, to speak to the paid part, paying youth is a discussion of equality. Adults are usually paid by an organization to spend time working on a project. If the youth is volunteering, they can't have as much say. And when you ask someone to volunteer, understand that you are on their time. So it really discusses that decision of equality and that shift in power dynamic. That youth voice and choice is really present when you can provide payment and bring them up to the equal level of their adult counterparts. So if you just don't have that funding, and youth voice is really important, and you need to start out in volunteer work, there are just some things we want people to be considering, and how do you go about that? We really think it's important to clarify the role and levels of youth input and where young adult voice can make a difference in a project or in an organization. So young adults really need to be clear coming in the door what their voice will have an input on and where their voice may not have an impact in certain projects you're working on or certain different tasks that are happening that young adult voice might not be present in. So it needs to be very clear. We hear so often from people who do youth voice work that no one in the organization is entirely clear what the youth involvement looks like, what their role is supposed to look like, what exactly that role is. So having that clear job description and expectation on both the level of the person running the organization and the young adult themselves is really important. Also, we think if you're going to do volunteer work, helping young adults ensure transition, so when they are done with your volunteer work, where they can go next, helping them reassess the position quarterly or biannually. A lot of the times I think people develop these positions as 1 year, and I think that's a long time to ask someone to commit without pay. So we really like the idea of starting someone on a quarterly or 6-month track and then reassessing that position to see, does this still work for you? Do you feel like you need to move on? How does this work? And then we really want to push providing other incentives. So we recognize that not everyone has funding from the get-go to involve Youth Voice, but thinking about what can we give back to the young adults in the group. So I'm part of a really awesome youth advisory council in Massachusetts called the Statewide Young Adult Advisory Council, and they did some really cool work like providing trainers to come in and train young adults in the council to share their story. They also helped us develop resume bullets to describe our role in the youth council, and then have sub-council groups to really hone in on skill development. Like they have a social media group where young adults who are interested in that can do some training and further development in their social media skills. So it's a way to pay young adults through task and professional development if you don't have the funds to actually pay them. And then when Tanya talked about that triangle, those 4 levels of youth voice in research work, I wanted to help translate it for everyone to be thinking in your organization, how do you think about youth voice and the roles that you bring on into your group? So we have some terms like an advisor capacity, where a young adult might be more involved on a youth advisory council, like our youth advisory board that Tanya described, or in a consultant role where they're paid by an hourly rate and their voice does make change and helps, but they don't have a total power shift in the organization. And then thinking about young adults as co-leaders or young adult-led projects in an organization. So kind of shifting that triangle from the research thinking to just general. If you're going to bring young adults in, you really need to be clear about the title of the role and what that level of youth involvement will look like. So an advisor versus a co-leader means an entirely different thing, and it should mean something different when you put it on paper and tell young adults they're coming in an advisory capacity, or when they're coming into a. So the next consideration is just preparing your team and young adults themselves to join your team. So this is another way to ensure clarity across the organization on roles and responsibility of young adults. So developing and drafting a really clear job description. I don't know how many times we've heard from organizations that really want help solidifying their youth voice and input, but don't have a solid job description for young adults or their providers and colleagues to really reference when thinking about what youth voice should look like. Something we also want to have you guys thinking about is how to establish levels of mental health disclosure required for being employed in a young adult position. So here at the RTC, there's different levels of disclosure required per task. So you may be asking a young adult to share their story online through social media or through a newsletter or a published journal, and really thinking about what level of disclosure that requires. So are they going to be sharing their name? Is that going to be going to an international audience because it's online? Or are they going to be sharing their youth voice within the organization just to provide feedback on direct tasks and research projects, or directly to the advisory council you're putting together? Are you going to bring in people outside the organization? And if so, will they know that the people at the table have mental health conditions, and are the young adults comfortable sharing to that large of an audience? So really be thinking about that before you even have young adults walk in the door. And then really brainstorming before young adults start what barriers to employment might exist. So the way you communicate within an organization, are you primarily communicating through email? Are you all required to have computers? If you work from home, does a young adult require to have a laptop? What's travel look like? Not all young adults have cars. Are you on a bus route? So just kind of before you involve young adults and ask them to join you, kind of brainstorm what are all the things that could go wrong? What are all the barriers to bringing young adults into our organization, and how do we address them before it even becomes a problem? And then we really want to push, and we know so many great organizations that provide training, including our own organization, on effectively working and engaging with young adults. And we really hope that you train all your staff from the top down on how to effectively work and engage with young adults. Youth culture is its entirely different thing than other cultures, and young adults bring different strengths and skills to the table and have different strategies for approaching communication within a workplace, and training staff on what that could look like and things to keep in mind is really important in being successful. Then when you're thinking about preparing the young adults themselves, so how do you help a young adult who wants to provide youth voice to your organization but might be new at doing so and are just walking into your door to be hired as a consultant or a youth leader? We talk about developing this really concrete job description, and then we say put it on the table when you hire that young adult and completely mark it up in red pen together. So create the job description so you have an idea of what this youth voice role will look like, and then bring the young adult in and say, what works for you? Does this make sense? How do we write this in a way that clarifies your role and also highlights your strengths? Also provide thorough and ongoing training. So we really push that professional development should not be getting someone onboarded when they started your organization. It should be consistent throughout all the time that they've stayed at your organization. I've been here for 6 years, and I don't think that I've gone a year without doing some type of additional training on my work to further my professional development skills here at the center, but also to be thinking about new ways and ways to learn and grow with our center itself. And then things like ongoing supervision and professional development, and just things to keep in mind in that sense. And that little things may not seem important to someone who's a seasoned professional and has 20 years of work experience, but are really important to a young adult who might be newer to the workforce. So when I came in the door, to know that the RTC had already thought about ways to support me and provide accommodations, and were mindful about policies that they may be very familiar with that I was not familiar with as someone newer to youth mental health research, was really important and valuable and made a big difference to me. And then when you're thinking about youth voice, I know this topic comes up a lot, but tokenism. What does tokenism look like? What does it mean? How do we avoid being tokenistic when we're having young adult involvement in the work? We define tokenism in a few different ways. We really look at it as having young adults just to say we have young adult input. And having one young adult at the table that gives feedback on everything. And I know when you first start, maybe having multiple young adults might be too much, but just to keep in mind that saying youth input is not one person, that you need a diversity of perspectives. Exactly why the RTC brought our youth advisory board together and hires multiple young adults at our center is because just one young adult at the table is not an effective way to say you have youth voice. I don't feel comfortable representing all young adults of the world when I provide feedback to the RTC, and I don't think many people would either, and you really need to think about that. Ensuring involvement is genuine without getting feedback from young adults. So when we assume that what we're doing is genuine and meaningful to young adults, but don't get the direct feedback from the youth working from us, that can really mean that you're being very tokenistic. I think people make assumptions that the strategies they've put in for including young adults are often very helpful, but when you actually talk to the young adults themselves, they may say, yeah, it's really great to be here, and I really feel like youth voice is valued in some ways, but here are some things that I think need to be worked on. So having that collaborative opportunity to discuss and get ongoing feedback. And a young adult said it themselves, when a group knows what they want to do and just want to check a box that says youth engagement, so they try and convince youth of their ideas rather than listening, felt really tokenistic. So not getting genuine involvement from young adults or asking them how their feedback should be incorporated, but instead wanting to say young adults were at the table, so kind of just convincing them, oh, this is what we want to do. Does that work for you, right? Rather than asking them what do you want to see? And then strategies, a lot of the questions you guys submitted for this webinar was a lot about like how do we genuinely engage young adults? What does engagement look like? How do we get young adults at the table in the door? And so our strategies for just overarching effective engagement is really having young adults involved 80% of the time versus a 20% at the end of the project, feedback on one piece of the project. We're summarizing our curriculum, so we're going to bring young adults in the end to read and edit it. That's that 20% versus 80%. We really think young adults should be involved from the get-go, like Tanya talked about, from the beginning of the project all the way to the dissemination of the materials or services you're developing. And that it's worth putting in the time and the resources. That you share concrete changes made based on young adult feedback. So when you ask young adults to join your organization and get concrete feedback on, say, a curriculum you're developing or a service, that you then go back to those young adults a couple months later and say, hey, that was really good feedback, and here's 3 ways in which we incorporated your suggestions into the work we do. We do that a lot with our youth advisory board, and they said that's one of the biggest things that keeps them coming back to join our YAB calls, is that when they edit a tip sheet or a journal article or give us feedback on a research question, we go back to them the next month and say, hey, remember that feedback you gave? This is how we changed what we developed. And so they really have concrete idea of what their voice did. And so getting uncomfortable and shifting the power change and thinking about that in general and asking for continuous involvement. A young adult said themselves, people who seek youth input need resources to be creative, flexible, and accommodating enough to capture the voices of those who aren't being heard. So you really need to get creative. You need to be thinking outside the box with genuine youth engagement. And then when it comes to accommodations and support, be thinking about how do we involve young adults and provide them reasonable accommodations. So this is just a quick definition of what an accommodation or modification would be. I think a lot of people get confused at what is too much and what's a reasonable accommodation versus unreasonable, and so we just provide this definition as a way to clarify what is reasonable to ask an organization to provide. And it's basically a modification in the way things are customarily done that it enables someone with a disability to perform the essential functions of that position. Here at the RTC, we found that young adults don't often like formal accommodations where they're required to disclose their mental health condition to our HR department on paper, but like to get creative. So we created an internal accommodations worksheet you'll see on the screen that asks young adults questions to be thinking about what resources do they need to be successful in their job. And then they work with their supervisor to get really specific about the accommodations that might work for them. And then we have quarterly reviews of those accommodations because we really recognize that those things might change from day to day. You may try something out and it really doesn't work, and in 3 months you want to try a different strategy. So changing around your job schedule and what time you come in the morning because your medications may make you groggy, or recognizing that to-do lists on the computer are way more strategic for you than writing them out, and just shifting how do you think about those things together. And really just pushing, individualizing these approaches. So we always talk about here how what you do with one young adult and support youth voice and with one young adult that you bring on and hire may look completely different from someone else. And that this idea of a lot of people say, that's a lot of resources, that's a lot of effort, we have to put in a lot of training to bring young adults on the table, we're not sure if we can do that. And I like this little phrase, short-term pain for long-term gain, that it may feel like a lot of work in the beginning to bring a new young adult on who's new to the workforce and newer to what it looks like to advocate for youth voice. But once you put in that time and energy in the beginning, it completely changes the dynamic of your organization and really is so worth it. So always push this, yeah, it may feel like a little more effort in the end, but it's going to pay for itself tenfold, and it's worth putting in the time. And then just be consistently thinking with your young adults about this formal versus informal process for support. So do they want to have to disclose to HR? Can you provide support internally within your organization to be thinking about youth voice and how young adults can be included without putting it down on paper and requiring a written description of their diagnosis and things like that. So then the last thing I wanted to go over is a little bit is questions we get a lot from employers who are just starting to think about how to involve youth voice in their organization. And they're really kind of logistical questions. And one of the biggest questions we get is how do we rein in our human resources department? How do we talk to HR about hiring a young adult? How do we write lived mental health experience into our job description? And how do we write kind of youth voice involvement as a preferred job qualification? And so our suggestions are really to get a champion within the human resources department and within your larger organization that really recognizes the value of young adult voice and input. And you really need to have them help you redraft pre-existing job descriptions to recognize that role. So we actually have a formal job description here at the RTC that we worked with our Human Resources Department with that now lists the value of having a lived experience of a mental health condition as a preferred unique job qualification. So it's formally written into this job description, and it provides us a way to advertise directly to young adults and to share that this expertise is valuable and it's preferred qualification that's written into their formal job description. And we recognize the value of that and want them to be here specifically to share that expertise. Some of the feedback we get from organizations is that they have trouble, especially in the research arena, with minimizing the rigor of the research or the work being done by bringing in young adults who aren't trained or don't have a PhD in the work that's that they're collaborating on or providing youth voice on. And so we think the best strategy for this is providing concrete examples and partnering with organizations who are already doing this well to show examples of the value of young adult voice. So we'll often partner with organizations and speak to their leaders about the value young adult voice has had on our research studies. And we know other young adult groups that are doing advocacy work that could really highlight the way youth voice has made a huge impact in their work, like Youth Move or NAMI National and their youth chapters, and kind of the value young adult voice has already brought to pre-existing organizations to help shift that misconception that the rigor of the work you're being done is not going to stay the same if you involve people who are not highly trained in this work and you're training them as they're going. And then with genuine recruitment and engagement, just general strategies that it's always helpful to get advice from the young adults themselves, thinking about creative advertising versus a traditional job posting. We usually add some color and flair to the job posting we send out through listservs within Massachusetts, rather than our official, formal, boring UMass internal listing that doesn't look as creative and exciting. It might not get out to young adults because they're not logging into the UMass system. And enlisting local partners that are already doing wonderful work with young adults. We partner with DMH and the Gift Graduate courses, which is a training in Massachusetts for young adults who are interested in employment, and different colleges and clubhouses to really spread the word about the work we're doing and engage young adults. So finding those partners, really searching far and wide and asking around for who's already doing this work and how do we involve them and how do we get some strategies from them to help spread the word about our new youth voice avenues or the way we want to employ young adults at our center. So that's the general overview of the youth voice pieces that Tanya and I wanted to cover. And so we wanted to leave 10 minutes at the end to really answer any questions, maybe ask you guys some questions. So we're now going to open it up and just see if people do have questions about youth voice or any of the topics we covered, or want to share a little bit about what they're doing in their state or their organization.
Thank you so much for that informative presentation. Our first question is there any way we could also see a copy of the strengths-based job description? Is this meaning it is written towards young adult strengths, or how is it written generally?
Hi, this is Tanya. We wrote it into our grant, the way we would hire young adults, but we also have, I guess, a flyer go out there for searching for the young adults in different youth councils and in different places. When we are interviewing the young adults, we really ask them for their strengths there. We're not really putting it out there in our job description, necessarily the strengths that we are looking for. We're not looking for specifics most of the time, but sometimes, yes, we do ask those questions in an interview, and the young adults are able to just shine, giving what their responses would be, what their strengths are, and what they can bring to the table. Yes, we'll be happy to share those materials with you guys. If you want to send us an email or ask that question directly, we'll send you an email or wherever you would like us to send that to.
So our next question is, what questions would you have when looking, I believe this was when you were talking about supervision, what questions would you have when looking to get their opinion on how things are going?
I would say ask them directly. I mean, I don't think there should be a fear on asking a young adult what they think is going on or how they think things are going. I think that they would be very open if you're going to ask a question with the intention to change something. They'll know whether you're being genuine about the question, and they'll be able to answer that question openly and honestly.
Yeah, and I think for me, strategies that have worked is really personalizing it. So working directly with my supervisor about tools that have worked for me, and then doing kind of quarterly feedback about, hey, remember we started that checklist and that to-do list online. How is that working? Do you like that system? Should we implement something else? So really thinking about how you're doing the work and kind of following up directly on those tasks. I think it's really hard when someone's like, how's things going? And do you like this? Do you feel like your voice is being heard? I'm like, it's really hard to respond to that open-ended general question. So I think kind of as much as you can, getting concrete. So even, hey, that project where you gave feedback on that survey, do you feel like your voice made a change? And what did you recognize as the strengths of that process versus what could we have changed in the future?
Thank you. Next question is, how do you get around the age discrimination factor in job postings? Would you just put youth ages 12 to 18 are strongly encouraged to apply?
So our job descriptions don't actually have an age criteria. In our title, we will say like a project assistant, and then when we strategize who we send the job description out to, we'll send them to young adult-driven organizations. And we'll specifically tailor that email and say, hey, this is a really good position for young adults, 18 plus, who are looking to do this work. But within the formal job description, I've never seen a job description with an actual age criteria. So I think we kind of do that informally, and it naturally works for us because of our partners who are help sharing the information. But that's kind of been our strategy, is doing it more informally. So I think that was the last question that came in online, but I think if anyone's on the line who's already doing youth voice work or has kind of started involving young adults in any capacity in their state, it would be great to hear what's kind of happening and what things have worked for you and what struggles you're having. I know here, as Tanya mentioned, with those tables, it's been a 6-year process of learning and changing, and every week something different changes, and we're really just kind of flexible and going with the flow in this process of learning and engaging and talking to the young adults here and externally to our national partners about what youth voice should and could look like, and then modifying as we go. I think the biggest thing that we really want to drive home is that things should always be changing, and there should be that big level of flexibility to recognize that as you learn and grow, there will be some growing pains, but it's really worth it to re-strategize and revisit all these mechanisms for youth voice on a consistent basis.
Someone had their hand raised, but it seems to have disappeared. If you had your hand raised, please raise it again. We have a traveling youth advisory process for our BMHCO company. Let me see if I can unmute her. We'd like to keep the youth in the loop. What social media do you like?
That's a good question. Do you want to?
Good. Okay, so social media. I know youth are still on Facebook, but they're also mostly on Instagram, Snapchat. They really like those places. So yeah, just be careful what you put up there, I guess. Don't put too much researchy stuff because they might not read it, you know, and yeah, a lot of them are interested in those things, but it's not going to be most of the population. So Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Snapchat, Instagram, I would say, are the top ones up there.
Something that's also helpful to think about is our organization created a strategic plan for all of our social media. So we thought about Twitter differently than we think about Facebook, and how Facebook usually houses an older population of young adults, whereas Twitter might be more focused on a younger population based on their statistics. So how do we tailor the content we're sharing on Twitter will look differently from how we're sharing it on Facebook. And then getting creative with Tumblr postings or more inspirational and less written content, more images and quotes and memes, whereas Facebook may be a little more written content. So really, we've been trying to vary how we enlist our content based on the social media site that we're working with, and tracking how our engagement looks like with young adults to kind of change that up as young adults shift, because a couple of years ago we were primarily focused on Facebook, and now we're recognizing that younger young adult populations are really heavy on Twitter, and that's different than it was 5 years ago. So keeping in track with the ongoing trends is helpful too.
Okay, she just also made a comment that they're going to try to do a graphic novel to convey comments and outcomes.
That's very cool, and I would really like to see it.
For all.
And I just want to thank everyone for your attention. There will be a brief survey at the end of the webinar. We'd really appreciate your feedback. If you have any questions that weren't answered, you can contact Tanya or Amanda. The slides and the webinar recording will be posted on the Transitions RTC website within the near future. And just please be on the lookout for email announcements for future webinars. Thank you very much.